he screamed at me. I sort of took a step back for a second and I looked at him and I said, you may be willing to sell your soul for a comp check, but I'm not. And I gave him my 2 weeks notice. And for the next 2 weeks, I sat at my desk and I did not try to sell a mortgage to anyone. So believe it or not, I didn't graduate from college saying, I want to be a mortgage lawyer.
You didn't? That's so odd.
I know, isn't that weird? No, I actually never intended on being in the mortgage business in the first place, let alone a lawyer in this business. Yeah. I graduated from college and my master plan was I was going to go work with my parents and I was going to be a lobbyist.
Oh, your parents were lobbyists?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I definitely did not know that.
Yeah. Not in DC, just in Colorado. So here in Denver. But they own at the time, the only bipartisan lobbying firm in the state of Colorado. They met when my dad was a state legislator and my mom was the legislative liaison for the governor's office. So that's a wild love story.
Wow.
But yeah, it's such a cool story. But so out of college, my first job, I was actually a campaign manager for a state Senate race. And my mom was running the Senate campaign fund here in Colorado. And I lost that campaign barely, and I was unemployed. I had no job. That's what happens when you lose a campaign. You're unemployed.
And how long was that between the time that you graduated and the time that you were out?
So I graduated in May of 2000 and immediately went to go work for a campaign, and I lost in November.
Wow.
And so I just needed something to tide me over until I picked up another race or, found another role or I was going into politics.
You studied poli-sci? You were a poli-sci major?
I was poli-sci.
So you're one of the few poli-sci majors who actually got the first job out of school in politics.
On purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny. Okay. That's so interesting. All right, go ahead.
But at the time, an old friend from high school's mom was the operations manager for the South Central Division for GMAC Mortgage. And she had gone through 3 temp receptionists that were terrible. And she needed somebody to come just answer the phone and go through FedEx boxes. And this is back in the day when branches would FedEx the mortgage file to the ops center in Colorado, and everything for South Central was processed here, but we didn't scan. It wasn't paperless. We literally FedExed mortgage files back and forth. It was crazy town.
Okay.
And so every day a huge stack of FedEx boxes would come in and I'd go through them and I'd make sure that the processors got them and whatever. And we had underwriters in the office. So very quickly I got bored with sorting FedEx boxes and answering the phone in a locked office and started asking for something else to do. And by the time I left GMAC Mortgage, I was a closer for Texas loans.
So and explain what that means.
So in operations in mortgage, right, you generally have a file setup person. So that was the first thing I did as a receptionist. So I was pulling taxes, sending out orders for title insurance, faxing out, requesting homeowners insurance information. And all of that then would go to a loan processor. And a loan processor then is going to take all that along with, your pay stubs, your W-2s, your tax returns, your bank statements, and they're going to process the loan file. They're going to evaluate your income and your assets and prepare the file for underwriting. Then the file goes to an underwriter. Underwriters, of course, double check everything, either approve or deny credit, ask for more documents, all that kind of good jazz, review appraisals. And then after the loan is fully approved, it goes to a closer. And the closer is basically going to set up, at the time it was a HUD-1, now it's a closing disclosure. How much money do you need to bring for closing for taxes, for insurance? How much proceeds are going to the seller? What's the purchase price? So you're preparing all the final documents closing, and then we would ship them by FedEx to the title company in Texas, Colorado, Utah. I can't remember. South Central for GMAC at the time was pretty big. But I specifically did Texas loans. And Texas, if anybody's in the mortgage business, Texas is a wild place to do loans. They have very interesting taxing districts. So you'll have multiple property taxes on a file. And then there's these special loans that are governed by a section of the state constitution called Texas equity loans, or 50A6, which is the section of the Constitution. So if you do a cash out on your home, it's considered a Texas equity loan, and there's a whole bunch of laws around how you have to do those. They're very scary, and only certain people in any company I've ever worked at were allowed to do those loans. So when I got trained in Colorado to do Texas deals, it was kind of wild, which actually led me. Ultimately, I moved to Austin. And I knew I could get a job in mortgage business there because I'd already done Texas deals. But before I went to Austin, I actually went to a different mortgage company because I decided that I didn't want to work for my friend's mom forever. Maybe that wasn't and she worked there too. Like there were a whole bunch of us from high school that worked there. And I was like, I'm out. I'm not doing this. I need to go somewhere else. So I worked at a couple other mortgage banks, and then decided I was going to get out of the mortgage business and that I was going to re-pursue my original plan to go work with my parents in politics and be a lobbyist. But I needed to go to grad school. So what grad school program was going to work to do that? Was it a communications program? What was it? And I landed on law school and ultimately went to University of Denver to law school. Met my husband, still planning to go work for my parents, not planning on actually being a lawyer, like not practicing law.
And how many years did you work after graduation so after undergrad until you started law school?
5 years.
5 years. Okay. And so the majority of those 5 years in the mortgage business.
The majority of those 5 years in the mortgage business.
Okay.
Yeah. I would dabble in political campaigns and stuff on the side still, but I was making good money and I was making a living and allowed me to move out of my parents' house.
Okay. But you wanted to get out of, the mortgage business. And so your passion was, and maybe still is, politics, lobbying. And so we can call it broadly public service. And so that's why you went to law school. You had like no desire to remain in the mortgage industry.
None. I thought I'd sort of hit the ceiling. I was either going to be a loan processor forever, or I was going to be an operations manager. And that really sounded boring to me. And I was like, nope, I'm going back. I'm going back to politics. I'm going to go to law school. This is what I'm going to do. So I go to law school.
Can I, so I just have to say one thing because we're both lawyers, right? So I left my career, if you want to call it that, after undergrad because I was bored out of my mind. And I thought, I'm going to pursue an exciting career as a lawyer. Look at what we've done the last 15, 20 years.
I know. Nobody's honest with us about how boring being a lawyer is.
No, I mean, yes, there's some, depending on your role and circumstances, it could be really exciting. But the vast majority of the time is like you're staring at documents, you're attending meetings, you're kind of, an intermediary between outside counsel, executive teams. It's like, oh my gosh. Anyway, all right. Sorry, I had to interject because it's hilarious. It's like you wanted to.
I was bored.
You were bored, so you want to become a lawyer, so you're not bored.
Right.
Not that you're bored now. I'm just saying it's just like it isn't the most exciting.
Perfect sense, right?
Yeah, totally. So anyway,
I'm glad it wasn't just me. I'm glad someone else did the same thing I did.
Yeah, totally.
Ultimately, a bunch of stuff went down, and state politics changed a lot. And my mom just wanted to retire. And as I was graduating from law school, it was pretty clear that she didn't want to keep going long enough for me to sort of make a transition. And she had teamed up with a business partner that I did not want to work with for a whole bunch of reasons. But so I was like, well, I guess and I I clerked at some law firms and I was like, yeah, I'll give this legal thing a go. Let's see what happens. Why not? And then the market crashed because I graduated in 2008.
Perfect timing.
I got my bar results the week the market crashed.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like all mine and my husband's offers were rescinded. We had no work. We didn't know what we were going to do. Everybody was predicting doomsday, right? We're like October 2008. The sky was falling.
Yeah, totally.
And we had actually gone to Chicago because it was a bigger legal market. And when the market crashed, we packed up everything that wasn't a wedding. We sold everything that wasn't a wedding gift, packed everything else in a pod, and drove back to Denver. Like, we're out of here. We have family in Colorado. We'll survive. Everything will be okay. We're out. And so we sort of got back here, and I thought, one of us has to have a W-2 job.
Yeah.
And we talked and hemmed and hawed and had found some contract work that sort of got us by. And Brian decided he was going to hang his own shingle and just sort of do some contract stuff. And so I literally went and applied for my mortgage processing job back. And I was given an offer for $10,000 a year less than I made before law school.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome. And so with bonuses, I was like, we're going to be okay. This is going to be all right. So I just start processing loans again with a law degree. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I finally decided to be brave, and I sent an email to the general counsel in Texas, and I said, hey, Todd, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm a processor in Colorado and I'm back. And by the way, I'm a licensed attorney now. Like, anytime you need me. He just blew me off. Like,
how big was the company? How many employees, more or less?
I would say total around 300.
Okay. So not tiny. Not
tiny. They were licensed in about 12 states, sort of like Colorado was the most north and west, and then it went southeast from there. So I just kept slogging along. Brian got, some great gigs. We were doing great. So we decided to have a baby. I have Michael. I'm out on maternity leave. I decide I'm going to email the general counsel again. And I email the general counsel again. And he responds. And he says, I'm going to be up in Denver. Can you meet me at the Denver branch? I have a 4-week-old baby. And I'm like, absolutely. Sure can.
Nothing holding you back from doing that.
Yeah. You got it. So I show up at the office. I find an office, and I hand the rest of the girls in the office. They babysit. Like, they're taking the baby. I go sit with Todd, and I find out that they're hiring a new chief compliance officer, and he's moving to Dallas, and it's this guy named Brett Foster. And I need to meet him when I get back from maternity leave. I'm like, this is freaking great. Like, wow. Fast forward, Brett starts, we start chatting. Brett comes up to Denver to shut down the Boulder branch, invites me out to lunch, and offers me a job as his deputy chief compliance officer. It started out he was going to do 2 regional people, but ultimately it just was he and I. He just immediately offers me a job. The head of HR was in the backseat of the car. She almost had a heart attack when he just verbally offers me a job when they
and you didn't. So while it is common for a compliance officer, especially chief compliance officer, to be a lawyer, not all chief compliance officers are lawyers. Many are not.
No, especially back then. So this was Michael was born in 2010. So this was 2010, fall-ish. And back then, a lot of chief compliance officers were non-legal compliance professionals, and they just leaned on outside counsel. But as a result of 2008, the Dodd-Frank Act, now we have licensing, regulators are getting more active, and that's really when more companies started hiring lawyers, compliance lawyers. And Starkey had to hire Brett. It is public information. They had to hire Brett. They got in some regulatory trouble, and part of their settlement with the regulator was that they would launch a nationwide search for a new chief compliance officer. And that's how they found Brett.
Okay.
And their outside counsel helped them find him. And so Brett and I worked together at Starkey. I mean, I moved to Dallas after this. Like Brian and I moved to Dallas, go work for Starkey Mortgage. Then Brett left and went to work for Lock Lord, big law firm in Dallas. Well, a nationwide law firm, but he went to the Dallas office. And I took over his role as head of compliance for Starkey Mortgage. And I stayed until December of 2013. And ultimately, we wanted to move back to Denver, and I was going to find a way to do it. And so we moved back, and that's when I went to go work for Accenture, who had just acquired Mortgage Cadence. And I thought, they're a mortgage technology company. I've been in mortgage forever. I know the new rules that are out. I can help this vendor, right, develop their compliance tech. And so it got me back to Denver. It got me into the vendor side, which I never thought I would do.
Were you so you weren't at Mortgage Cadence before Accenture acquired it?
I was immediately post-acquisition.
Okay. Got it. And so we worked together for, I don't know how many years, at least a few years. And so you were head of compliance for Mortgage Cadence, which sat as a kind of it was a separate business. It was just owned by Accenture. And you were at Mortgage Cadence until when?
I left Mortgage Cadence September of 2019.
And you went to your current role. Is that right?
You did not.
Right.
I went to work in Big Law. I went to Ballard Spahr.
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. So the guys I've used, gosh, they were my outside counsel way back at Starkey. So I've known them for a really, really long time. And I wanted to leave Accenture, and I was exploring opportunities, and it was just one of those things where if you keep in touch with people that you know, then you find out about opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't. Like they didn't post for a job, right? They knew that they wanted to grow their team, but they weren't sure how they were going to do it. And then they had a junior or a mid-level associate resign. And it was like, oh my gosh, we know Mandy's looking. She'd be great, and it just sort of the pieces fall into place. And so it's one of those lessons of don't lose your network. Make sure you always talk to people, and because you never know what opportunity might present itself.
Yeah. And do you think it's much easier to maintain those relationships today than it was, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, sort of when we were getting started, or like with LinkedIn, for example? Or do you think there's sort of this superficiality of that LinkedIn kind of creates? So you maintain connections or you create new connections, but are they really like a connection is not a relationship, I think is the point. So through the relationships that you maintained, an opportunity was presented to you that had you not maintained those relationships and made a positive impression, obviously, when you were working with outside counsel at that time, like things would, you would not have had that opportunity most likely.
Yeah, I mean, I was actively looking for a job, right? So they knew that because I reached out to them and said, hey, if I know you have lots of clients, like I'm looking to make a move, whatever. By the way, I'd love to come work with you guys. I've always said that. I've always kept that communication open. I actually talked to them before I came to Cadence. I was trying to go work with them to get back to Denver when I was trying to leave Starkey. So, but to your point, actually LinkedIn, I'm not sure LinkedIn helps keep up real relationships.
I totally agree with that.
I find it superficial is a great word. And I find it to be a lot of noise, and it can be a distraction. Like, yeah, you see things, people post this, post that. They're moving here, they're moving there. Oh, they posted a job. They're hiring somebody. great. It's just like Facebook for business.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. It may like, oh, John knows Jeff. I want to know Jeff, right? But then you still have to take that step, I think, to develop and foster a real relationship with someone, because I don't know about you, I'm not just going to recommend somebody for a role that I'm only connected with because they asked to connect me on LinkedIn. I don't know them. I don't really know them,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, totally. So I have a bunch of questions for you. As you were talking, I was just thinking of these. What were the sort of skills you think that helped you navigate your way to a senior role? Because you actually did that relatively quickly, I think. So what was it you think that helped propel you to a senior role from you have your law degree, and that's great.
Yeah.
But you didn't, as we alluded to or mentioned it, you didn't need a law degree to become a compliance officer, right?
Right.
It's helpful, I understand. So what was it?
I honestly, and it's funny because I've had these conversations with, like Trevor and stuff. Not only am I like, I know a lot of mortgage compliance lawyers, right? Um, I know a lot of lawyers, but I don't know a lot of mortgage compliance lawyers that have done performed and sat in positions in multiple roles on the business side of the mortgage industry prior to being in law school. It provides a different perspective where I can say, okay, here's what the Truth in Lending Act says, and that's all well and good. But how do you operationalize that? How do you implement it in a real functional way when I know that a loan file gets touched by 5 different people, and this is what I know what those people do. I know, I've got a processor who's trying to close 75 deals a month, right? And loan officers breathing down their neck, trying to get deals closed that are tough deals or whatever. So I think part of it is those 5 years I spent between undergrad and grad school have served me very well in a legal mortgage position, having a perspective that other lawyers don't.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. You can build that kind of perspective in several ways, and one of the things I emphasize to my daughter who's in college, and but also in one of my courses that I produced, is getting experience outside your area of expertise, right? Don't kind of work in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more that you know about your company's products and services, the better job you'll do, because you have that different perspective. And so, yeah, I think that's interesting that you say that.
And you're right, you
Okay.
can get it in different ways, right? Like I have one of my direct reports. She didn't work in the mortgage industry. She actually worked in oil and gas.
Hmm.
And I brought her in back when I was at Mortgage Cadence, and I had her take some like loan processor trainings from the Mortgage Bankers Association.
Mm-hmm.
And then sit down with me and I'd say, ask me, what does a processor go through? What questions do you have about like, how does this work? Go take the trainings on the software so that you know how a user
Mm-hmm.
experiences in the system, so that you have a different perspective when you're trying to help the product team create the thing that does the compliant thing, but understand the user experience so that you can help because the software developers don't have that perspective either, right? So come at things from multiple different angles. Go sit with somebody, go sit in their shoes and ask those questions and watch them do their thing, so that you have that business eye that just because you've never been a loan processor doesn't mean you can't learn what they go through, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about mistakes.
Oh
Man,
gosh.
have you made any mistakes in your
So many,
career?
so many. I bet I made some this week.
Yeah, like what are some of the biggies that somebody hearing this would be able to learn from and kind of not necessarily totally avoid making the mistake, but at least learn from it and sort of so they can better navigate their career and their work life.
Um, God, I use this example with my oldest. You look at us using our work stuff on our children. My 13-year-old who like doesn't want to ever make a mistake on a test or on his homework or in a swim meet and get a bad time or whatever it is, and it's just like devastating to him. The first of all, none of us are perfect. We're all going to mess up. It's how you learn from it and how you move on from it that really matters. God, I've made so many mistakes. I think the one that sticks with me is when I was working as Deputy Chief Compliance Officer back at Starkey, and I was in Dallas, and I had written a policy and taken a strong position with the operations team on how they needed to do something based on the law. And somebody brought it back to me and basically said, I think you're wrong. And I went back and I looked at it and I thought, oh no, I messed up big. Like I missed it. And I sat in my office alone for a little bit. And then I thought, well, I got to go own it because we have to change it. And I can't just like sweep this under the rug. I mean, I'm sure I could try, but ultimately I felt like that would look worse if I tried to cover it up than if I just bit the bullet, went in. So I walked into Brett's office and I shut the door and I sat down in a chair and I started crying. And I said, I messed up. And he looked at me and he goes, all right, let's fix it.
Yeah.
And I sort of looked at him and I was surprised. Like I was expecting to get in big trouble. Right. And he goes, there are 55-year-old executives that don't know how to admit when they mess something up and ask for help fixing it. You are like, always be like this. Like this is a skill and a positive quality to be able to walk in and go, I need help. I messed up.
Yeah.
We got to fix it.
Yeah. Admit your mistakes. Right. Like, and that's so difficult to do because the fear, right, of the consequences.
I've taken that. I've shared that with people I've mentored. I've encouraged my team to know that, look, I may get frustrated if we miss something big, but ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like if the mistake has happened, what matters is that we all come together and we go correct it and fix it.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, you have to take that approach. Otherwise, I only see bad things happening, right? If you don't own up to your mistakes. And who wants to work with somebody who
I don't.
Mistakes?
That's another lesson I learned is that after that, when I went to go look for new jobs, right, and in an interview, asking managers what their management approach is and, asking some probing questions to try to feel them out because I don't want to work for those people exist who will scold you and yell at you and be angry with you for making mistakes. I don't want to work there.
Yeah. Yeah. But unfortunately, sometimes you don't realize that until it happens.
It's hard, but yeah.
Yeah.
And then you just have to, then you've made a mistake in your job choice and you just have to move on.
Yeah. You know what, though? It's interesting because I have had a couple instances of that happening in my career where I knew that it was going to be, or that I was going to be working for somebody who's pretty tough, which is fine. But it wasn't until several weeks into that new job where something like this came up. And it not like so let's call it like a mid-level mistake. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't like, the sky's going to fall. But it was something and I owned up to it. And my gosh, the reaction was not like Brett's. It wasn't
Brett.
No, not at all. It was kind of like a WTF type of response. And yeah, it's really tough. I'm thinking, okay, I have to start looking for another job because this is, even if I can get past this, I don't want to work in that kind of environment, and work for somebody like that. But it turned out that those roles, I were some of the jobs, positions, however you want to describe it, that I grew the most in, not just in terms of like developing, my skill set, but just as a person, kind of a sense of like maturity that I developed as a result of those really difficult situations. So you can't avoid them. You could try, but it's, pointless.
No, it's hard. You're going to come across them. I
Yeah.
agree with you though. I think some of the places that I think were the most unpleasant work experiences, the places I discovered I didn't want to be,
Yeah.
I learned so much from.
Yeah.
God, this actually reminds me. I was a loan originator for like a hot second back in the pre-crash. Let's call it
Yeah.
subprime.
Yeah.
And I went and worked at a local branch, and we were selling subprime mortgages. And I remember I had a client, they had an FHA loan on their house, and it was a good loan, and they shouldn't do anything with it. And the branch manager wanted me to convince them to do a cash out subprime and pay off their FHA loan. And I told him I wouldn't do it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And he took me outside behind, it was like in a strip mall. He took me outside, and similar, I think it's traumatic. I didn't want to remember it, but he screamed at me.
Oh my gosh.
And told me that it was my comp check and it was my job to sell that mortgage to those people. And I sort of took a step back for a second. I was probably on the like verge of tears, but I was like 22. And I looked at him and I said, you may be willing to sell your soul for a comp check, but I'm not. And I gave him my 2 weeks notice. And for the next 2 weeks, I sat at my desk and I did not try to sell a mortgage to anyone.
It sounds like a very uncomfortable 2 weeks.
It was really uncomfortable. Luckily, I worked with some really nice people, some of whom I'm still friends with. But, and they all left ultimately. But this guy, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's okay. That's fantastic. You basically stuck to your principles, and
it was hard though.
Yeah, no, totally. But this is also great for people to hear, to know that they are going to be put in positions at some point in their career, sometimes earlier, sometimes later, where their principles will be tested, or their ability to stick to their principles will be tested, and it could be very difficult to deal with that, or it could be very easy to be sucked into it. Like, hey, it's just, just this one time, whatever. We're going to do this.
It's my job.
Yeah, we're going to build a product that maybe, kind of takes advantage of people, or it could be interpreted as taking advantage of people.
Right.
And so, what are you going to do? At the end of the day, I think you'll feel a lot better with yourself in the long term if you do stick to your principles. And that doesn't mean like, okay, you just quit and walk out, because then, you're kind of letting people down, your coworkers who may not have that idea, right? Or have come up with that idea for a product that kind of may be taking advantage of people, or could be perceived as such. But yeah, giving a 2-week notice. All right, fine. I mean, that is kind of an extreme case, but it can certainly happen. So that's interesting. Okay. So I have to ask you this question, because I've heard differing opinions on this, and I don't know the degree to which, I mean, I want to hear from you, the degree to which culture has changed in the office during your career, if at all. Maybe you'll say it hasn't. But as a female working in an industry that maybe traditionally, I don't know about anymore, but traditionally was more male dominated, at least if you look at financial services in general, like I think it's fair to say, you tell me if you disagree, but I think it's fair to say that historically male dominated. And so, here you are, a female executive, okay, and you have been for several years. Have you come across challenges either that you have experienced as a result of you may be the only female or one of a few in a room or an office or any other kind of space? Or have you observed others, so other female executives, and they don't even have to be executives, just employees, right? Where they have sort of experienced or felt not so much like discrimination, okay, but discomfort, sort of, and anything like that. Or do you think it's like overstated? I don't know. Or is it understated?
I don't know. I don't think it's overstated.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be understated. Well, it used to be. So, I mean, I can say sort of like the tech world, right? Like where most developers tend to be men. So in a mortgage branch, like a retail shop, when I was in the retail shop, it was mostly, so your operations staff was mostly women. So your processors, your closers.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right.
And then most of your executives and salespeople were men. And yeah, for sure, there was some uncomfortable stuff going on. Whether it was inappropriate comments from loan officers to processors, that happened a lot. I know personally of folks, who were sexually harassed. And what I can only call like mansplaining. Oh, you're just my processor. I'm smarter than you are. Oh, you're just, and then, as I sort of came up in the business, right? And then when I was head of compliance, other than HR and operations, the rest of the executive team was all men.
Mm-hmm.
And there was definitely...
You could feel it in the air?
You could feel it. You could feel it. And there were times where you felt like you were screaming into the wind and nobody would listen until you got, one of the guys to support you. Right. So you had, I would be strategic around, before I went into the executive meeting to present this thing that I knew that people were going to tell me I was either wrong, they were going to blow me off, that it wasn't a big deal, I was overreacting around risk, whatever the case may be. I would strategically go to one of the men on the executive team who I knew would listen to me first and say, okay, this is what I have. Here's what I'm going to, it was generally my general counsel because he and I were close and I knew he would listen.
Sure.
And so before I went into the meeting, I already had one of the guys on board, right? Who
was going to be in that meeting?
Who was going to be in the meeting.
Okay.
So I already had an advocate who was one of the guys. And sometimes they'd blow him off too, but at least, it was like, it gave us a little momentum.
Yeah.
And then early on, going to conferences, especially in financial services where it's largely male dominated, there can be some uncomfortable situations.
And is that still the case today where?
I think way better. I think it's gotten better. I do. I think things have improved. I think there's less of it. First of all, there's a lot more women in financial services today than there were 15 years ago.
Okay.
There are a lot of senior female executives who are now like in the conference arena, it used to be, I'd go to an MBA conference and it was like 95% old white guys.
And just to clarify, MBA,
Mortgage Bankers Association.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
That's,
And
yeah,
now, you know, it's way more diverse, not only across, gender, but also race. Like, and I think that the industry has been making a concerted effort. I think they realized years ago that they had a problem. And things are better. I'm sure it still happens. I'm sure, 100%
yeah,
sure of it.
yeah.
I have actively sought out, and I've also been lucky, right? My current role, I'm at ACES Quality Management. The CEO of ACES used to be at Mortgage Cadence. So I know him, right? And I know the kind of culture that he creates.
Yeah.
And I know it's an equitable and open one, and where bad behavior isn't tolerated. And so I consciously chose this role. I'm at a place in my career where I can do that kind of thing, and I'm lucky. And
yeah. Okay. Right. So, yes, you are. However, if you're just starting out, even for your first job out of college, you probably should have the mindset that you are interviewing companies because they should be, they should be, I don't want to overstate this, but somewhat, if you're a good person, you're a hard worker, the company is lucky to have you, right? Interview the companies. Of course, they're going to interview you, but you got to kind of turn the tables to some degree so that you at least mitigate the chances that you're going to be in, you're going to have to work in a culture that is antithetical to your beliefs and also just maybe not, to your point, equitable in terms of treatment, right?
That's a great point, and something I wish I'd learned sooner. I used to dread that part of an interview where they'd say, well, do you have any questions for me?
Yeah. And how many times have we said, no, I'm all good. I did some research on the company before I to show, hey, I actually did some research. So no, I'm all good. When that is like the last thing you want to do and say, right?
You're exactly right. Yeah. And you know what? Exactly what we're talking about now should be part of your playbook when you're in an interview and the things you want to know about the company.
Yeah.
What are your company's policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah.
What are your company's, what's your mix of males versus females versus, whatever on your executive team?
Yeah. And do different types of research. Obviously, you should know the products and services that any company you're interviewing with offers, but maybe
go to their leadership page.
Yeah, well, but also like try to talking, previously about like superficial connections. Try to establish initially like connect to somebody, take them out for coffee. You will learn so much more. You'll learn 100 times more about a company's culture by talking to, let's say, a small number, 2, 3, 4 people who have worked there for a while, compared to a 2-hour interview where you're kind of like on, you're on your best behavior, of course, always, but you're not really like asking the questions that you would ask somebody in a different setting. Right?
If you had a friend who worked there and you would ask them, give me the skinny. That's a good point. Maybe if you're going to go on LinkedIn, find somebody who either still works there or used to work there.
Yes, exactly. Maybe even better, right? Because people who would say like, stay the hell away from this company.
Yeah.
Don't just put all your trust in one person's experience, because who knows what led to that. But if 3 out of 3 people or 4 out of 4 people say something similar, that obviously is a red flag. But if you learn that, let's say, the handful of people who left the company, they actually speak highly of it, and maybe they're going in a different direction, in their life or in their career, whatever, like, okay, that's so much more valuable than, asking, questions of somebody that you're interviewing or interviewing with, right? During the interview process, I think, anyway. I mean, you should still ask those questions.
You should do both. You should do both.
Yeah.
Because Because what if you ask somebody about, their diversity policies and they get all squirrely and they're like, we don't have one.
Yeah. Totally. Okay, that's great. So, what do you think in hindsight, or what do you, I should say, know in hindsight that college really didn't teach, but was like fundamental for you to just function well in an office environment? Right, whatever, it could be hard skills, it could be soft skills, whatever it is, and regardless of whether that was in the first part of your career, when you're in the mortgage business, well, you're a non-lawyer in the mortgage business, or after law school when you're now a lawyer in the mortgage business, like regardless, just throughout your career.
It's so funny. I did this exercise with my team this week because, and this is a total soft skill, is to try to understand interpersonal stuff in your office, right? Trying to understand that you and I may communicate in very different ways, and how I communicate, you may perceive as offensive, and that's what's creating the issue. It's not that you're a jerk, or understanding that you and I may react differently to stress. And if I know that Jeff reacts to stress by shutting down and getting quiet and not telling me, then I, as a teammate, know if Jeff gets quiet, I need to reach out and say, hey, Jeff, how can I help you? You seem stressed out. You're quiet. Is everything okay? What can I do? How can I support you? Are you overwhelmed? And as managers, being able to understand that too, that your staff all react to things differently.
Mm.
But if as a team, you can then learn about each other, right? Instead of just reacting. Like, as young people, it's like there's sort of this perception is reality thing. Well, I think Jenny doesn't like me because she's abrupt all the time. And her communication, well, it turns out that's just how she communicates, and she likes me just fine. But if I don't learn that person communicates in a different way than I do, it can create office tension and problems in the office that could be resolved, and you could all work really well together if you understand that you're all different,
Yeah.
It sounds so cheesy, but I did this exercise with my team this week. We did like the DISC personality assessment thing. And then we spent an hour and a half talking about, my report says this about me. Oh, that's so different than me. My report says this. And they all said at the end of it, their takeaway was they think we can work better as a team now because they understand each other more.
Yes, 100%. And that is definitely not something that you learn sitting in a college classroom or lecture hall, right?
No.
And
we
often
hang out with our friend group, we go to class, we do our work, we take our tests, like whatever.
You're also not like, you're not necessarily, in fact, I would say in most cases, you're not really taught that at work either. I mean, there are these more forward-thinking companies, like it sounds like yours is, and you are as a manager, that really take that seriously. It's all about communication, right? At the end of the day, and how you can most effectively communicate and collaborate with each other. And you really have to know somebody. You have to know more about that person than you otherwise would if you're just kind of plodding through your day. And
it doesn't mean you all have to be best friends.
No, definitely not.
But if you know and understand each other, and you can play on each other's strengths, and support each other when you can see that someone is struggling and having a rough day or whatever, a rising tide raises all ships, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's my approach. I was lucky enough. I had a manager back at Starkey that did the DISC thing with us. We were having some serious personality issues among the processing team. And so she hired a consultant to come in and do it. It was unbelievable. She also did one. Another good one is, and it plays off of it too. Don't Move My Cheese, the book about change. It's a skinny little book, but something big changed in the company, and none of us like change. It's hard. Like if we've done something the same way forever, like, and there's monumental changes in an organization, it can be difficult. And everybody, going back to everybody's personality is different. Everybody handles and approaches that change differently. But there's a book called Don't Move My Cheese, which is, and there's a whole training thing around it in the workplace that you can do, but it's all about handling change. And that one was another really useful training that I thought that I've taken away and tried to sort of implement bits and pieces when things change in a small company, and try to work with your team on, look, this is hard and none of us like it, but let's find a way to do it in a way that's going to be productive and get through it. But yeah, Don't Move My Cheese is another good one. I'll have to find my copy. It's over here on the bookshelf somewhere.
All right. Yeah, cool. I've never heard of that. I'll check it out. Well, I think that's great. Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Office IQ. If you're looking for ways to accelerate your path to success, you can find more resources like this on our YouTube channel or at officeintelligence.com. We offer courses and other content that will literally change the direction of your career for the better. If there are any topics you'd like to hear more about or questions you'd like me to address on future episodes, you can send an email to jeff@officeintelligence.com.